Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Inside Florida Politics podcast, powered by the USA Today Florida Network. Can we call him Alligator Ron DeSantis? The governor unveils a high-profile and highly controversial immigration detention center in the Florida Everglades. And he showed it off to his one-time mentor, one-time adversary, and now friend again, President Donald Trump. Oh, and among all that, DeSantis also signed a $117 billion state budget just in time for the start of the fiscal year. I'm your host, Antonio Fins, and these are the stories I'll be discussing with my colleagues, Anna Gani-Lesson and John Kennedy. Well, pinch me, but it was just a week ago the world's attention was held captive by a potential World War III with Iran, and then potentially peace on earth, can it be? And now the attention is all about, and the discussion is all about, Florida's own Alcatraz in the fabled River of Grass. But that's how the Trump world turns. Anna, we have been reporting for some time about the issues the state, arguably the most aggressive in pursuit of immigrants to deport. How has it struggled with detention space? You have covered the frustration by some local law enforcement, and we've written about what one immigration advocate called a horror, and that is the Chrome Detention Center here in southern Miami-Dade County, where yet another person, by the way, being held by ICE died in custody at the end of last month. The facility in the Florida Everglades will hold 5,000 people. And the governor also talked about another similar center that you've written about up in Camp Blanding. Does this address the space crunch that we've seen so far in the state with the immigration issue?
So Alligator Alcatraz actually right now can hold 1,000, can hold up to 3,000. So I think they set it up this week for 1,000 beds. Last night, they put a sign up that actually says Alligator Alcatraz outside of it. I know that the Attorney General said that detainees were coming in last night. He posted on X. But the Alligator Alcatraz, the processing center, I was told it's not a detention center, it's a processing center because hopefully that they will be not there for long, and then they will be removed to their countries of origin from there. That's what the airstrip is for, right? Camp Blanding also has an airstrip. Camp Blanding is, let's say, between Gainesville and Jacksonville. It's in Clay County near Stark. That's where the prison is, where they do executions. And that is supposed to hold 2,000. So 2,000 plus 3,000 equals 5,000. And that's what they're aiming for, right? Is that enough? I don't know. The big beautiful bill hasn't passed yet, and that has like billions and billions and billions of dollars for immigration stuff. So is it enough right now? I would say I'm sure it would alleviate the crowding in Chrome. I'm sure it would alleviate the overcrowding in a lot of these places, but we'll see. This is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. I'll put it that way.
That's the point, because, for example, the Trump administration, with the blessing of the U.S. Supreme Court, is now making more than 1 million people who were previously covered by permission to be in the country because they were either under temporary protective status or they were here under that humanitarian parole program. Now those folks are going to be undocumented and therefore illegal, and therefore subject to deportation. So you got, the pool of people to deport is now going to grow not by tens of thousands, but potentially by 1 million or so. And so it just seems, and I know that when they were doing the press conference the other day, well, I'm not sure we can call that a press conference, but when they were speaking publicly at the facility in Okeechobee, Florida, down here in the Everglades, they did talk about that they're seeing all these people now self-deporting. So I think that's something they really seem to be counting on, is people self-deporting. But at the same time, the pool of people who are now going to be in the country without permission and subject to deportation is about to grow exponentially.
Yeah. So listen, I don't know how many weeks it was where I was like, hey, there's this blueprint. There's this 37-page, immigration enforcement operations plan that the state has put out. That's what they've been using to do Alligator Alcatraz, to do the facility at Camp Blanding. And you had Kristi Noem, she said that she wanted her phone to ring off the hook from governors saying, how do we do this? How do we do this? How do we do this? Mm-hmm. That's the goal, right? They weren't shy about it. They were honest about it. Larry Keefe, he's the director of the State Immigration Enforcement Council. He said it. He's like, we want this to be a blueprint. We want this to be a guide for every state. So let's be honest here. Billions of dollars are in the big, beautiful bill. You have the president coming down here, hanging out in a tent in the Everglades, saying this is awesome, calling our Attorney General James Uthmire good looking. We're going to see this in other places. When? I don't know. How soon? I have no idea. But I know that Camp Blanding will be up. I believe a spokesperson for the governor said sooner than it took them to make Alligator Alcatraz. So fewer than 8 days, less than 8 days.
It was interesting because one of the things of news that did come out of that gathering in the Everglades at the facility there was the fact that the governor has asked, and I think has been now given permission, correct me if I'm wrong, to allow National Guard judge advocates to now serve sort of as immigration judges there in the location. The idea being that you can speed up the process, theoretically speed up the process of adjudicating a lot of these cases and making determinations whether people do get access to live in the U.S. and ultimately residency, or they are denied and therefore can be sent home. The interesting comment there from Kristi Noem was something to the effect, and I'm quoting her part of it here, is that, that they'll get due process and then quote unquote, and then immediately be flown back to their home countries, which suggests that, when you talk to the immigration lawyers and they talk about due process, they're talking about an exposition of the facts before a court. It sounds like what Kristi Noem is talking about, due process being just a very efficient way of deporting people, just getting them out of here. Maybe I'm overstating it, but it seems like, that they want that facility to not just hold people, but like you said earlier, move them out quickly.
You're not wrong. I don't think you're overstating it at all. So I was told it was a processing center, right? So there's detention centers and there's processing centers. Detention center is meant to hold people for a while. A processing center, they don't want them there for a while. They want them in and out. That is something that they've already been doing. They've been sending people to Texas. The judges there are quicker. They're harsher. Miami, for example, has like one of the largest backlogs in immigration court. So, and as you know, we've already had like a conflict between judges here and our state government, right? And their disagreement on our state immigration law. So yeah, they've already done it. Like they've already been sending people to Texas because it's faster. The courts are faster because the judges are willing, I guess, or I wouldn't say willing, but the judges are stricter, more conservative. So they've already done that. So what they're doing, I guess, is just they're doing the same thing here, right? They're going to get more judges that align with the mission of the state, and those people in those processing centers will be processed, I guess, in a timely fashion. I don't know, man. We're going to see. This is still so early.
Yeah, well, but here's what we have seen so far. You've mentioned the word process. Yes, they're going to be processing them. We heard a lot about how they're brought in. We heard about the security, the fact if anybody escapes, what the wildlife around there, the terrain's supposed to be like. We heard about the judges. We heard about the airstrip. What we really didn't hear much about is the release aspect. Let's say somebody was determined that person had a very valid political asylum claim, how they would be released. We didn't hear anything about that. So I think the we will see has kind of been answered, unless I'm missing something here.
I completely agree with you. I don't think I've heard anything of release, but it's just been moving so fast. It's moved so fast in the past 2 weeks. At first they said, oh, we'll get Alligator Alcatraz up in 30 days. They got it up in 8 days. During that tour with Kristi Noem and President Donald Trump, Kevin Guthrie, the head of the Division of Emergency Management, they were talking to the medical staff. The medical staff said, oh, we had 24 hours to set up. And Kevin Guthrie said, I was relentless. And they are relentless. They will they're going to do what they said they're going to do. On what kind of timeline, I don't know. I just know that it's very sped up. And do I know what the ultimate plan is for what the United States and what these detention centers and these processing facilities, what it's going to look like in a year? I have no idea. But I can tell you that Alligator Alcatraz and Camp Blanding are a hint. Right. And states need to, it's going to start popping up in other states.
All right. Well, you talk about how fast this all came together and speed. Well, you can almost say that about the way that the governor and the president seem to have patched up their differences from a couple of years ago during the 2024, the early stages at 2020, 2023, in the early part of the 2024 Republican presidential primary contest. Mr. Trump went after, really savaged the governor, including the infamous three-finger pudding commercial that was running. But to be honest, I started hearing from Mar-a-Lago a few months ago that the governor was regaining the president's favor because of this full court press on immigration. And lo and behold, during this gathering the other day at the facility in the Alligator Alcatraz, whatever you want to call it, although some people find that to be a very offensive term, and understandably why. The fact of the matter is that they seemed, Trump was asked about the relationship with DeSantis, and he said, John, that it was a 9.9 out of 10, but maybe also a 10, and that they would be friends forever and so forth. So, they kind of have patched things up. What does this rapprochement mean for Florida politics as we, veer toward 2026? The president has already endorsed, Congressman Byron Naples, a Republican, member of Congress for the GOP nomination for governor next year. Who knows what will happen then with Casey DeSantis? How does this start shaping 2026 in Florida, John?
Well, I think you're going to see, with DeSantis regaining some mojo with Trump, it probably means that we'll see the governor publicly acting even more in support of what he thinks are the president's wishes. He's already been trying to do that. Immigration is the most vivid example. But, watch for Medicaid eligibility to become stricter in Florida next year as the governor responds to what is certain to be included in the final version of that big, beautiful bill. DeSantis has seen that surviving in Republican world on the periphery of Trump is difficult. I doubt that Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, who we all remember DeSantis viciously exiled a few years ago after she'd engineered his first election for governor. Well, she's never going to come around to being a DeSantis fan, but Trump sees imitation as the sincerest form of flattery. And DeSantis building cruel prison camps in Florida for migrants fits Trump's and his immigration guru, Stephen Miller, that their idea of the branding and imagery that they're trying to promote with their immigration tactics, trying to scare immigrants into self-deporting. DeSantis, though, is term limited, so whatever he wants to do that requires the Republican legislature to endorse him, he may still have a hard time. But DeSantis is plotting a future that places him a little bit more in Trump's inner circle. And for Florida politics, that's going to be reflected in policy. And you may see some wrangling between people like, as you mentioned there, Byron Donalds, the Naples Republican congressman, who has gotten Trump's endorsement already for governor to succeed DeSantis. So, and then whoever else may run the risk of getting into that race and trying to defy Trump's endorsement. But anyway, I think we're going to see it in policy fairly swiftly with DeSantis. DeSantis has already been a little bit of a dirt track version of Trump in Florida for the last few years. He's targeted LGBTQ community, universities. How much more can DeSantis do? Well, he may do more just to try to get a little bit more into Trump's ear.
Well, let's talk a little bit about DeSantis. Since this is all speculative, one thing that got bandied around, people were pointing out during the Trump 1.0, the first term, there was quite a changeover in the cabinet during those 4 years. And generally in a lot of administrations, right after the midterms, you do see some changeover in cabinets. It seems like perhaps the governor has really positioned himself to perhaps, if there's an open, let's just say in Department of Homeland Security, that might be an avenue. And quite frankly, for the governor being DHS secretary, dominating the whole discussion of immigration, which we know, and for a long time has been the number one issue for the bulk of the Republican electorate, not just in Florida, but across the country, that may wedge him more into the national conversation as we gear toward 2028 and beyond.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I mean, in DeSantis world, people are hot and cold. It seems like Kristi Noem, the current Homeland Security secretary, she has, been at odds with Trump at times. But this past week, when we saw her in the Everglades, she seemed to be very much in that orbit. DeSantis is going to be out of work come January 2027, which isn't that far off. He's clearly still thinking he's going to be in the White House in 2028. So he needs to do something to fill in that gap. He could do something independently, start some kind of right-wing government foundation and issue white papers that nobody reads, or campaign full-time, traveling the country while living off a political committee, although his candidacy might appear stale by the time he finally does relaunch officially a presidential campaign. Or, as you suggest, maybe he's burrowed his way back in far enough in Trump's orbit that there's some semi-prominent agency head role that he could do that would give him a little bit of a fresh coating of MAGA before he runs again for the White House. So, I think it's still kind of a work in progress, and some of it may depend on, who stays and who falls out of favor with Trump. But, detention is all about rehabilitation, Antonio. And we saw DeSantis well into his rehabilitation tour as he and Trump this week walked around the razor wire there in the Everglades.
Yeah, speaking of, you mentioned the phrase a work in progress. Well, something that was a work in progress for a lot longer than the 60-day, Florida legislative session was the budget. And finally got signed just in the nick of time with the July 1st fiscal year starting. You had been talking about this in previous podcasts, how, this budget deal was, took some work, and it was a work in progress, and you were predicting it might go up to the 11th hour, and it did. And all of that got occluded by the Everglades, the immigration facility. So tell us the budget. It got done. So what's in it, what's not, and what got left out or got vetoed out, shall we say?
Yeah, well, we finally got a budget for the year that started July 1st. It's smaller than last year by a shade, the second consecutive year that the state spending has been reduced. With a smaller budget, of course, the goals are more modest too. Per pupil spending is up only a couple of percent. That's not much. And there is a $1.3 billion package for teacher pay, which is kind of in keeping with some of the accomplishments of recent years that were intended to get a handle on what is really a shortage of teachers in many parts of the state. Environmental spending, social service spending, and even transportation spending are all up, but mostly in a kind of maintenance way. There's a kind of a natural inflation which happens with budgets, and this budget probably reflects more of that than really, any kind of ambitious expansion of anything. There's really no signature achievements in this budget, other than that the state is increasing reserves. That was kind of noteworthy. The reserves now are up to almost $16 billion that are salted away. Now, does this suggest that Republicans in Florida don't have much faith in the Trump economy? Maybe. But it's very possible that the tariffs and federal spending cuts that we're seeing out of Washington, that they're going to cool this economy enough that, in Florida, tourists pause their trips here. A lot of Canadians stay away. Housing remains colder after being red hot for so long. So all that means that the state economy also shows more signs of struggling in coming months. So maybe it's good that the most bountiful thing in this budget is the state's rainy day fund, because there may be rain in the forecast. Beyond that, we saw DeSantis exact some revenge against those who crossed him in session with his almost $600 million in vetoes. Miami-Dade is the home to House Speaker Daniel Perez, who challenged DeSantis on a host of issues: immigration, insurance, university presidency appointments, and most of all, the Hope Florida program that's so important to First Lady Casey DeSantis. Well, maybe no surprise, Miami-Dade lost dozens of programs and projects to vetoes. DeSantis seemed to single out the House a lot in his budget signing, in the actual budget signing event, where he continued to criticize Perez for challenging the governor with the governor kind of seeing any kind of challenge as basically defying the will of Florida voters, and the Republican voters especially, who helped elect House members. DeSantis went out of his way to praise the Senate for sticking with the GOP program, which basically what means that they were more malleable to the governor's wishes. For Senate President Ben Albritton, that meant most of his wish list of projects survived the vetoes, including state taxpayer funding for a park in his rural hometown of Wauchula, and a county fair building that's climate controlled. So there you get, that's the kind of political pork that leaders get in the budget. When DeSantis, he can choose to veto that stuff, or he can let it slide for some of his friends. And for Albritton, I think he, made the most of his relationship with DeSantis. DeSantis also took one more shot at the House by telling House members not to, quote, rerun this movie next year, meaning don't try to cross him again. And maybe now he thinks he has an even stronger ally in Ben Albritton. Just as we were talking about how DeSantis is trying to rehabilitate himself with Trump, I think the governor is feeling like he has righted the ship with the legislature. Maybe not the House. He is clearly seeing Perez as an enemy. But if he's got Albritton on his side more firmly, then DeSantis knows that he can win a lot of policy and budget fights with the House in anything that's a 2-against-1 fight. So somehow, even as we spent a lot of time this session writing about how DeSantis's days looked like they were numbered as he got closer to the end of his second term, at this moment, I think the governor is feeling like he's, getting back on the horse. He can't stop time, but he can still be a bully, the personality that he really loves. And a renewed alliance with Trump and almost $600 million in vetoes, I think that kind of shows that bullying is still in favor for DeSantis.
Well, even as the ink may not be dry right now in that budget, the fact of the matter is that preparations for the 2026 legislative session, which comes up earlier this next year in January because it's an election year, they're going to become earlier. Is there any scuttlebutt or any speculation as to whether Perez in the House come around, or are they going to remain at loggerheads? Is there any sort of any writing on the wall, any handwriting on the wall here?
Yeah, everybody's pretty quiet right now. Perez had no real response to the vetoes that seem to be targeting him a lot. He went to the Everglades event earlier this week, and notably was sitting in the audience, not up at the head table with people. Even Trump seemed to be surprised by that, asking him, don't you want to come up and sit here with us? But I think Perez knows that he's persona non grata with DeSantis right now, certainly in DeSantis's doghouse, and he's gonna stay there for a while. Now, Perez seemed to enjoy that role, but in the second year of a House speakership, that's the second and last year of his speakership, his power and influence is going to be diminishing too. So how long Perez can stay as this kind of antagonist to the governor is a question mark right now. Maybe he sees some political capital in it and some political future, and maybe he thinks he still has the House, fully in lockstep behind him. But that's a hard position to be in. Anytime you're outnumbered 2-1, in other words, governor and Senate versus House, that is a tough political position in Florida.
Yeah, well, I think we've seen enough of Mr. Trump to know that when he's asking Daniel Perez, wouldn't he like to be at the table? He very well knows, and he's kind of needling him and sort of winning some points over with the governor as well. Yeah. All right, well, that'll wrap up this edition of the Inside Florida Politics podcast. I want to thank all our colleagues across the USA Today Florida Network for all the hard work they do, which informs the podcast. And of course, as always, our production guru, Rob Landers, for making this all come out and making us sound and look good. All right, that's it for this week. See you next time.